Hello, everyone. We are going to give it a couple of seconds to allow people to dial in. I expect that we'll have a pretty good crowd today. For those who are new to what we're doing, the OpenChain project is running an automation case study from September through to December. The case study is intended to help people understand how to automate compliance as easily as possible. We are using a graphical user interface developed by TNG and Facebook, which allows people to call various different open source scanning tools for compliance. On one hand, that allows everything to be super simple. On the other hand, that's also just the beginning of the story. Last month, we looked at the tool in a general sense, and we discussed how the graphical user interface was created and what type of internals this graphical user interface uses. In this meeting, we're going to go a little bit further. We're going to talk about how the graphical user interface can call a specific tool called Open Source Review Toolkit, ORT. And we're also going to dig deep into how ORT itself works. So on one hand, if you're new to this field, you can see how to quickly use a graphical user interface to call a very useful open source compliance scanning tool. On the other hand, if you're a more sophisticated user, this meeting will allow you to understand more details about ORT. For those who are generally unfamiliar, ORT is commonly used in, for example, companies based in Germany, such as Bosch and Here Technologies. Okay, I am not the star of this show. The star of this show are the people who created these tools and who can talk about them. In just a minute, I'm going to hand over to Max, who's going to talk about the graphical user interface, and Thomas and Sebastian, who are going to dig into the internals of the ORT tool. Before that, I'm just showing our antitrust policy notice. We do this at the beginning of every meeting. You can read the full policy on our website. And if you're a Linux Foundation member company, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andrew Updegrove. Okay, we have 29 people on the line so far. It's getting busy, and I'm going to hand over to Max to begin this discussion today. Max, the floor is yours, and your coordination with Thomas and Sebastian is also yours.
Yeah, I will directly. I hear myself twice. Okay, I will directly hand over to Thomas to give to start with the overview of the OSS Review Toolkit, to give a to show what this brings to the table, what this addition to the compliance ecosystem contains. And I will after that, Sebastian will go into details and explain the individual modules and show how it can be used, and go more into the technical, how it can be used. I think Thomas will share how it can be easily tried out and give us a vision of that. And after that, I will continue with how that integrates into the GUI tool. So Thomas, please start. Thomas, you are muted in Zoom.
Hi all. My name is Thomas Tienberger. I'm the head of open source for Here Technologies, and also one of the core maintainers of ORT. I thought to start off with is to kind of give people just a sneak peek so people can see how Ort looks like by giving you a sneak peek on something that we're working to make Ort more accessible to everybody. And that is a Gitlab and Github integration that we're building. It's only a sneak peek where we'll show the full thing at the, well, hopefully if I talk at the Open Compliance Summit in December, but it kind of gives you a good overview of kind of what the capabilities are of Ort. So for the people who don't know, here, this is the GitHub address, but now I'll jump straight into the Gitlab integration. Is that it's not yet, it will be open source, it's not yet public. We're currently doing beta testing and making sure that everything works. The idea is that you can very easily, you just need a gitlab.com account and you will be able to start scans. So for the people not familiar with GitLab, in GitLab you add something called a GitLab ci.yml file to your project, and that allows basically building a build pipeline. So the idea of what we wanted to do with Ort, you can use it in two ways in your process. You can either point it at a repository that you just want to scan. So I will show that in a minute, or you can integrate it, say, whenever your developer makes a code change, that every code change from the development team is checked. So what I will show here is I'll do the easy one. So for people not familiar with GitLab, so you have this concept of this pipelines, is that this is how you build stuff, and you build your code. And what we did is to integrate Ort. We wanted to do it really deeply and not having to run any additional web services, but really just make use from GitLab that you can easily integrate it and make the maintenance low. So this is one of the modes how you can run it. So when you can run a pipeline, and as you can see here, it basically gives you a form. And the first option, to make it easier, Ort is can be built as a Docker image. Now, most people might not be familiar with how to build Docker image. So what we did, we made it very simply. If I change this to true and then I hit the build button, it will automatically build Ort for you very easily. It just takes about half an hour and then it's done. So what we're trying to do with this integration is make it easier for even non-technical people to get started with Ort, and we'll provide a very detailed documentation by step, so that you can easily start it. So this is one of the modes. You basically just fill in what you want to scan, so the name of the software, the version of the software. Then you can type in the type. So we support Git, Mercurial, Subversion. So you just did that. Then you type in the address of the thing that you want to scan, and then the URL. And then there's some more parameters that I won't go in now, but basically we have all kinds of abilities to basically allow, for instance, scanning without a log file. That's what this one does. So there's all kinds of issues. You can even say, I want to, for development purposes, you can specify the custom version of Ort if you want to use a specific version, yes or no. So what that does, and I actually have a pipeline running at the moment, it basically triggers Ort. This is how pipeline view in GitLab looks like. So in this case, I made a very simple one, but it just runs Ort. And if you then click on it, it will show you the build. Now, this might not be so interesting. What you're really going to be interested in is in the job artifact. So this is how we integrate Ort. It just adds a scan report to what is called your job artifact. So the same way where normally when you build code, your build artifacts will be there. This is just, Ort will add another folder there with the scan results. So this is makes Ort very useful because you can integrate it really in any CI/CD system, because it just produces files in the end that you can use. So here you kind of see the type of artifacts that Ort can produce. So you have on top, we have plain open source notices, which I'll show in a minute. Then we have, you produce a Cyclone DX SBOM. You can produce Spdx SBOMs. You can produce, and here is a integration directly for GitLab specific. So GitLab, on this left-hand side, you have here security and license compliance. GitLab has its own report format, so we integrate that. And the easiest one, which I will now show, is the visual one, is what we call the web app report. So that looks like this. So it just literally shows you an overview of all of the detected licenses and the declared licenses, and you can just basically easily browse. So what was found basically in your project. And a built-in feature of Ort is it has the ability that the developers can specify which things they use only for development and do not end up in the release artifacts. So this allows you to specify different policies. So I did this for this one, where you can see if I hover over it, it shows me that this is in Spdx speak a dev dependency. So this is only used for development and not for doesn't end up in the release artifacts. And so yeah, you can do it like this. You can see all of the information of all of the packages. All of the licenses are always transformed into Spdx. Since we're also working, I'm one of the core contributors to Spdx pack as well. So you can always, what we do is we compute on top of, from a license perspective, on top of Spdx. And so that's why we translate everything into Spdx. If this is kind of the table view, which mostly, well, a lot of the lawyers prefer, it's kind of like an Excel on steroids, where you have all kinds of filters and all kinds of things that you can enable and to view repositories and all this stuff. For most developers, actually prefer the other view, which is kind of like a tree view, where you can literally expand what is in a project. And we then also, for people interested in how then developers specify what is actually, this is what is called an Ort YAML file, small YAML file that people can put in your code repository, and this kind of specifies like the file paths that are used only for testing. In this case, also the scope is for testing. And what you can also do in your process, you can specify all kinds of labels integration. So for the people that are interested in software bill of materials, I actually downloaded the same results. So just a sneak peek on how that looks like. So here you have the Spdx SBOM. So this is one of the this is currently an ISO standard, but we can also do CycloneDX. So whatever SBOM format you prefer, Ort can basically support it. If you want to have still plain text notices, that is also something that Ort also can generate. So it will just generate the plain text version where it lists the packages. The nice thing about Ort, and Sebastian will show that in more detail, you can basically completely customize how you want to do your notices. It's a built-in feature. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Sebastian, who's going to talk a little bit more about the various Ort components.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Thomas gave you a jump start basically into Ort's features and how you can integrate Ort with GitLab and how the Ort reports look like. But maybe this is all a bit confusing if you don't know yet exactly what Ort actually is. I'll try to share my screen and give you a quick rundown of the README of Ort and go a bit into the technical tools that Ort is made out of. Just let me select my correct screen here. Okay. So to start with, when I founded Ort in when was it, about 5 years ago, when I was still working at Tier Technologies, we found that there is basically no tool on the market that fits all purposes in terms of open source compliance checks. And instead of coming with yet another tool that is supposed to replace all other tools, our idea was to come up with a tool that is basically the glue code between existing tools. So our goal is not to replace whatever your solution might currently be with Ort, but to allow you to mix and match your existing tooling with the help of Ort. So Ort is a toolkit, like the name says. So it consists of tools that it ships with, but it also lives from integrations with other existing tools, like ScanCode, for example, as a licensed copyright scanner, or also we have integrations with Software 360 as a component metadata base, and so on. So that is the basic idea behind Ort. It's supposed to be a toolkit, glue code between existing tools, and an orchestrator for a compliance pipeline as described by the OpenChain standard. So I would be as bold as saying that we regard Ort to be the leading open source solution for OpenChain compliant automation of compliance scans, basically. By the way, if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm having a hard time reading the chat while talking. So either Shane or anyone, if there are questions in the chat, please just interrupt me, and I will try to address them as I speak. Otherwise, I will just continue to go over the different tools.
Okay, no problem. We had a question in from Ninoji-san from Toshiba, but he was just replied to by Thomas, so everything is good.
Okay, great. Then I'll just continue. So usually the first question you need to ask yourself when starting open source compliance scans is what to scan, right? So many people don't even know what their dependencies are when analyzing their projects for compliance issues. And this is the question that the analyzer tries to answer. So the analyzer supports quite a bunch of build system, package managers, and languages, and it scans the source code of your own project for these for the presence of these package managers, basically, and then gathers all the dependencies, the metadata, and builds up dependency trees, and basically, collects everything you'd ever want to know about your dependencies on a metadata level. The interesting bit about Ort here maybe is that all implementations for these package manager analyzers in Ort work by introspecting the projects from the outside. So there is, in comparison to other tools, no need to modify your build system via build system plugins or anything like this in order to get analyzed by Ort, which means you can also analyze projects with Ort that are not supposed to be or prepared to be analyzed with Ort, like any open source project on github.com, for example. You would not make the maintainers apply a build system plugin for white source or whatever in order to scan their stuff, right? So this is not necessary with Ort, which is, it has pros and cons, let's say, but in our case, we believe the pros outweigh the cons. But this is a technical feature, let's say, to keep in mind when analyzing your projects. Maybe one analyzer that I should highlight here is what we call, where is it here? The Spdx Fallback analyzer. And this might ring some bells because you might ask yourself, well, why are we talking about Spdx here? Spdx is a license standard. It's an SBOM standard. So it's usually an output of a build, right? But we are also able to use Spdx documents. Here it's also mentioned as the input of a build. And we use that whenever we need to analyze code bases that don't use a dedicated package manager or build system. So if you're not using a Java Maven project, and if you're not using NPM and JavaScript, but you're using C, C++, right? Like in the embedded Linux world with your own GNU make file system or whatever, that's not a modern file system in the sense of managed dependency management, right? So what can you do to provide Ort all the missing metadata that is not in a machine readable format present inside of the project? And what we decided to do is we simply leveraged Spdx to describe the project and put the machine readable metadata inside Spdx files that we commit along with the project. And then when analyzing the project, we find these files similar to like we would find Maven POM XML files or something like this. And then the analyzer can just continue, and that's basically the place where then the metadata is taken from as a substitute of package managers. The next step after fetching and gathering all this metadata would be to download the actual sources of your own project and of the dependencies in order to get them scanned. That is what the downloader does. That's not very spectacular, so I will just skip this step and go straight to the scanner. A common misconception with Ort also is that Ort itself would implement a license scanner. That is not the case. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel here, and instead we integrate with a bunch of existing license, copyright, and also snippet scanners. Our primary scanners being used currently are ScanCode from NextB, an open source license and copyright scanner. And we also do integrate with commercial solutions like FOSS-ID as a snippet scanner. So the Ort scanner module is really just a wrapper around scanners. It orchestrates and calls scanners, and then again gathers the results in the end, transforms them into a common data model so the results are comparable, and assembles the results in Ort's own result format. A bunch of more scanner integrations are planned to be implemented in the future. Scan OSS is on the list, and we have a few rather small example implementations like Amazon's Ascalono, LC, and LicenC, which is the Ruby-based license scanner that GitHub itself is using when analyzing license files and displaying this banner about which license is being used. So these are just reference implementations for completeness to show how you would implement scanners. Then one of the more recent additions to Ort is the advisor. We realized quite quickly that given all the metadata that we have collected so far, we cannot only answer open source compliance questions, but also security questions, right? With the basically exact same set of metadata gathered by the analyzer, we can also query security vulnerability providers about known security vulnerabilities in any of the dependencies in the dependency graph as assembled by the analyzer. So the advisor is that component. It enriches the existing results with advisories or findings from security vulnerability providers. But there's also more behind the concept of the advisor. We are currently planning to extend the advisor also to query defects, for example. So you could easily get metrics about how many open issues are there in this open source component and I'm using, and that might be an indication for you to use or not use that component, depending on your own policies. Likewise, there could be ideas like integrating advisories about static code analysis results and things like this. So the advisor is rather open in this aspect, but the primary goal currently is to focus on security vulnerabilities. There are a few example provider implementations. So we support Sonatype's Nexus IQ, which is a commercial solution. We also support Sonatype's OSS index, which is, let's say, free to use solution. And we also support, again, from NextB, vulnerable code as a security aggregator that we can query. So vulnerable code itself aggregates various sources of security vulnerabilities. I think it's about 20 sources or so, starting from NPM and GitHub advisories over Debian and so on. So it's a really nice aggregator to use for Ort, because then we don't need to query all those 20 sources, but just vulnerable code, and we get results from about 20 sources and communities for security vulnerabilities. Okay, so far we just collected a lot of data, and the question is now what to do with this data, and that is where the evaluator comes into the play. The evaluator, is a very generic and highly programmable tool where you can access every aspect of the data model of Ort and create rules. So you could create rule violations if there is a second level dependency that is statically linked and under a strong copyleft license or something like this, right? And you could also take security vulnerabilities into account and say, if I have first level dependencies that have a score of 5.5 or greater according to CVSS3, then you could basically make the evaluator return with a negative exit code and break your build. So it's a really highly programmable tool with a custom DSL based on a Kotlin script where you can do anything, basically. And finally, in the end, there is the reporter module, which is here. And the reporter module generates those files that Thomas already showed you in his GitLab demonstration. So we have a wide range of reports that we can generate. We can generate reports that are meant to be distributed, like nicely themed PDF disclosure documents. We can generate documents that are not meant to be distributed, like the internal web app report, which is rather for visualization and debugging purposes, maybe. We can generate Excel sheets for the legal lovers of Excel. We can generate this GitLab license model, which is what is being consumed by GitLab then. We can create plain text notice files. And since very recently, and that's where Max comes into play soon, we can generate Opossum input that can be visualized and edited in the Opossum UI. Okay, that was the very quick rundown of the various tools inside of Ort. And if there are no questions, either by voice or from the chat, I would hand over to Max for his Opossum UI. Because one of the things sort of missing in Ort, if you want to say so, Ort was highly tuned towards CI/CD usage, configuration as code, and so on. And except for maybe the web app reporter, there's not much, not many visual tools, let's say, in Ort to inspect the results or to browse the results. And that's exactly the gap that Opossum UI tries to fill.
I think
see
there's a
Dirk
question
raised his hand.
Dirk? Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, Dirk, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the presentation so far. I'm catching up on Ort. I think the fundamental principles haven't changed. So it's about automation, as my understanding, as far as possible. So I'm curious how you resolve the conflict or how it goes together when there are things that typically require human intervention, like, for example, the snippet review or so. How does it go together that you try to automate as much as you can? That's my understanding. And sometimes situation where you need to bring things in front of a human who then makes decisions.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So there are different places where human interaction could be needed. Let's maybe start with what you mentioned last, which was snippet identification. Sorry, I'm going to the scanner. So FOSS-ID, for example. FOSS-ID is a scanner that works on a remote server. And that's very different to the mode of operation of ScanCode, which is a local tool that you can run on the same machine where you run Ort. So first of all, this is an asynchronous process. So what Ort here does is it triggers the analysis on FOSS-ID in a non-blocking way. You can optionally also block, but usually we do this in a non-blocking way and report back any, we do this in a blocking way and report back any pending files. That's what FOSS-ID calls files which need identification. And then someone from the clearance or curation team needs to go to the FOSS-ID UI and go through these pending files, do the proper identification. And then on the next run of Ort, we would benefit from these identifications and the issues basically would be gone. So that is a very concrete example how human interaction would work at the case of FOSS-ID. right? But there are other places, for example, in rule violations where a human needs to make a choice if you have a dual license project, for example. And this is where Ort's capabilities of configuration as code kick in. So we have a few example docs here that explain to you how to do things like license classifications, how to do error resolutions, package configurations, curations, and so on. And as part of curations, you could also curate the license, for example, and do license choices and things like this. So Ort is really a highly configurable tool with a admittedly confusing amount of configuration files and options, but you can pretty much implement every workflow that you have. You can do license choices on a project level. You can do it on a global company level. You can curate metadata, fix up broken and missing metadata. It's everything built into Ort, basically.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
to add to Sebastian.
Go ahead.
So to add to Sebastian, so Ort has so many options. So what we did in here, we'll open source that later this year. Ort has an ability, what is called how to fix me text. And how we use it internally in here is whenever we throw a violation or whenever there's an issue, we compute actually what tool in Ort you can use to fix the problem, and then we give that as a solution recipe to the end user. But maybe after Max present, I will show you how we built our process around Ort to do exactly this kind of clearance workflow with an expert workflow, but also the self-serve workflow. We actually have both inside of here. But I don't want to steal from Max's time because he wants to show Opossum as well.
Yeah. Can I just make sure on the design principle here, which is you coordinate a lot of tools, of course. And then as you delegate to those outside tools, if human intervention is needed, it is done through those outside tools, which implies that Ort has state information about that in the next run, it comes back to specifically that project and that human intervention in the outside database, right? You're not on the second run of Ort, you're not losing all the information that you manually entered in the outside tool. You're able to keep that connected.
Absolutely, yes, of course. No resolution is lost or anything like this. And whether human interaction is really needed really depends on the tool, of course, that you're using with Ort. For example, with scan code, the human interaction needed is rather low. There is no such thing like pending snippet identifications or so in scan code, because scan code is not a snippet scanner. So one thing you might need to do is maybe identify false positives, but that is also something you can configure away via error resolutions in Ort, and on the next run, then the resolution will be gone. Yeah. Sorry, not the resolution will be gone. The false positive will be gone, of course.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I would continue. Just looking around if someone raises the hand or something like that. I don't think so. Then let's share my screen. So let me continue in this view of the web report that we have seen, where you have the overview and the tree of the dependency tree of that project. I think that's even the same project that Thomas showed, the MIME types project. And here you can see and understand all the findings, all the metadata. But with the Opossum integration, we can go one level deeper. The Opossum integration looks like that. It's at the start after the export of the Ort result, it's a tree of files that you also see in your source control. So there's a test folder that contains stuff, and there's a package.json that references dependencies. And if I compare that to the, if I put the Ort results here to the right, we see that the MIME types project, that is this source code, has dependencies. And for example, the MIME-DB as a prod or as a runtime or something dependency, as an actual dependency, not as a dev dependency. I can see that here in this UI also, that the package JSON has now dependencies here in this UI, so I can see the information from the Ort result in this UI, but I also see file level information. So that is maybe also present here in this scan results part of the OSS Review Toolkit web report. Here we have it in a file tree structure, so that is rather similar. And it's convenient to dig deeper. So in this example, I have the MIME-DB, and there's a index.json that has mentioned MIT license finding by scan code. That's information I took from the OSS Review Toolkit here. So they say it's MIT and the license file. If we want to check that, we have a button in the OSS Review Toolkit, in the Opossum UI, where we can just jump to that file and see the content and see, oh yeah, that's pretty obviously correct. So it has the possibility to review. It also has the possibility to correct stuff. So if I would see, oh, I'm not happy with that finding, the for example, the URL is not what I want to have seen, let's drop that. I can modify that and have can modify the result in Opossum, so I can fix and correct stuff. And I can also go through the dev dependencies. They are way more interesting in that project. So if I dig deeper in the dev dependencies, there are dependencies that have dependencies, and I can see these dependencies. This debug file has a licensed source file that is also MIT, and I also can open that in the browser and see it here. So it's that's the first. That's the result of the integration into the OSS Review Toolkit, that we get all the identified compliance information here visualized. And then we can go through the different views that are also in the partially in this web app, where you can correct stuff. And I think there's still missing integration that provides us with the copyright information that OSS Review Toolkit found. So, but that will soon be added. And yeah, that's the first stage of integration. So you can try. The first stage is that you have a tool to understand the OSS Review Toolkit result, and you see which files contributed which dependencies of which kind, and what are, for example, scan code findings in the actual source code. And the next level of integration, let me just switch to the to a different input file that contains a little bit more data, and that might also partially answers Dirk's question with snippet scanning. So I took the same result that we have seen just now. So we still have all the dependencies here, but I added additional tools like ScanOSS, and that provides me with the information that this test.js file that did not contain any license header or anything that was found by scan code was by ScanOSS attributed to MIME type. So that's not conflicting information, but if you are want to dig deeper to understand, to get an additional view on the source code, you could actually add more data to this UI. You can also plug in other, you can plug in other providers for compliance information and mix and match and compare and understand whether there's conflicting information. So that's how you would how the OSS Review Toolkit integrates into this Opossum UI tool, and what that adds to the table. And yeah, are there any questions to this very short presentation of the UI? I think the deeper run through of the UI was in a previous call that was recorded, so I don't want to go to just explain it any deeper. I just wanted to show the integration.
We had a little question in from Stephen, which isn't about the UI, but it might be something to cover. Stephen was interested in how multiple license matches are resolved. What kind of clearing decisions can be done?
I think there are several. So for the one thing is that the license itself might be a license expression with OR. I think that was what Sebastian previously mentioned as project or company level resolution of license collisions or of license choices. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but you can configure that for MIT or GPL, you always want to choose MIT. And the second thing is multiple license matches. So that potentially means I have scanned a project that is labeled as MIT, but scan code found multiple license findings, how that is resolved. And maybe that's a question I can forward to Thomas or Sebastian for
Yes.
yeah.
So yeah, so we have actually, funny enough, I was working this morning on a case where I have an Apache project, MQ, where they have a license file. So this is an Apache project. They have one license file on the root, and it mentions. This project has 28 subcomponents, and the license mentioned for each component, which are the licenses for bits of code that were copied over from there. So in this case, what I would do is, and let me just start I'll take over from you, Max, in the screen share. And there. So the way how we fix this, and that's why Ort has built-in mechanisms for that. So if there's a problem with a dependency, we have a thing called what we call a package configuration. I'll just quickly show it in the example how that looks like. So what you can do there is you can, here you see the example, we can override basically the license findings there. So there's several mechanisms. So imagine that you have here this Maven package. What you can do basically, this is how it was matched. I can indicate, because when we do scanning, we scan the dependency, we always prefer to scan either the source code repository or the source code artifact. In this case, the source code artifact. But what this allows you to do is it allows you to indicate paths. Because we scan the source code repository, source artifact, not everything in those things are actually in the binary artifact that you may be consuming. So the first option it allows you is what we call path excludes, and this similar mechanism in the YAML file, where you can say, hey, the documentation folder is present in that artifact, but it's actually documentation of it actually doesn't end up in the binary. So the normal mechanism in a workflow is first you make sure that the right thing is being scanned. So that's what we call the reuse curations. So what Ort has mechanism where you can actually override. This is the right source code repository. This is the path in the source code repository that I want you to scan. And the next mechanism is basically you add so-called what we call path excludes. So even if you scan the right thing, not everything that's inside the directory that's the right thing is necessarily ending on a binary. So that's when we use path excludes, where we mark up all of the directories, say this is used for documentation, this is used for build tool and all that stuff. And finally, the last mechanism that you use in Ort is where we actually start curating the license. And this is what you see here below, where basically you can very specifically with the start lines and line count indicate now for these findings are actually a false positive or is a matching code, make it this license. So Ort really has really specific mechanisms to clean up what findings you get from a scanner from license matching. Maybe to go back, and I saw we had a question about how the process works. So this is a presentation that I have given before, how we do compliance at Here Technologies, and it kind of gives us an idea of how we actually have two different workflows at the moment. So this is our kind of our onboarding workflow. The first bit is not so interesting, but we basically have a way that we register all of our software, and we classify our software. What that basically means is we have a labeling system for all of our software, and then we write our policy rules, and that's what you see below. This is how okay, not okay to use something. It depends on the product context. So we have a way that we have different policies in Ort for, say, an SDK, or a different policy for, say, if we ship software that goes into a car versus, say, an internal service that's only used within the company. And so this is our kind of our workflow. First, we classify the software, so we know what type of software can use the right policy rules. Then we have a mechanism where we basically we tell the developer to clean up their code. Basically, we call this the definition of ready. This kind of make sure that their system is properly set up and add the YAML file to it, so that they clearly indicate, like, this is the code in my directory, in my code repository that goes into my release artifact. This is what I use only for development. Then they trigger the scan, and here you see our workflow. So what we always work with in Ort, and this is the nice thing about Ort, the problem that we always had with a lot of processes is that with a lot of tools, it either dumps everything in the hands of the developer, and they have to learn the tool completely, and they have no way. And when you need help, basically it's like read the separate wiki page and all things out. So the way how we set up Ort is basically we have everything within the same tool. So whatever tools we use in the background for our developers, it's one workflow and one workflow to get support. So if they run the scan, they see what's broken. The report itself, the web app, as I showed, as Max and I showed before, you have this how to fix me text. That how to fix me text tells them how they can fix their own problems. If they need help, then they can ask us. But we have this expert review system. Whenever they clean up a scan, we for the open source office and legal, you can see here, we will actually review this. So you can also devise a workflow where you have a central team do all of the work. But in our company, basically, we process so much software in the tens of thousands of open source components that we decided to have a workflow where we don't want to block the developers from being able to fix things. So what they do is, in Ort, they can read how to fix a problem, they can try to fix it, and when they send in a fix, we will review it, and then it will be applied. And the nice thing about Ort is that you have the possibility to apply a fix at project level or globally for your whole Ort installation. And so that was for us very useful, because a lot of the commercial tools that we used previously, we could only patch up for a single project, and that was very annoying. So this is kind of the expert workflow. So where we said we do an approval workflow. So everything that developers fix up is, in our case, always reviewed by the open source office and by our legal team before we actually have the proper open source notices, basically. So this is, we call this notice insertion, but this is also software bill of materials, but we still call it, and then we screw it. The other workflow which we are now working towards is what we call the continuous integration. So we do continuous scanning, and so this is the mode. So after basically teams have been set up, so we clean them and everything is proper up, we are dropping them into the GitLab workflow. So this is where the difference is. This is the top one. This is a one-off scan, basically prior to release. This is where you're basically going to scan every code change. Now, if you review, you cannot review every code change. This is simply impossible, because a single team within our company may have anywhere between 10 to, say, 100 code changes per day. And I have more than 500 teams. So it's impossible to review. So the way how we are working the Ort workflow on top of it is, we have still the same workflow where they can ask support. So in a scan report, if they need help, they can get a support ticket or they can have a support chat. But what we do here in this building is we call this the audit process. So the nice thing about Ort is you have access to all information that Ort collects. Like literally pretty much anything you can fetch in that. So what we're building on top of that is we're taking this information and we're looking for patterns that we think are questionable. So as Sebastian said, there's a mechanism called resolutions that allows you to squash anything you find in an Ort scan. You sometimes need this, but this is a last measure. what we commonly saw is that teams, when they are new to the whole review process, they're like, hey, there's a measure to squash all of this. And this is what we see also with a lot of it was also in GitLab built in the feature. You have a lot of tools that do a lot of notifying, reporting, and what do your developers do? Boom, they just squash it, and the problem actually doesn't get fixed. So the way how we now have the Ort setup, yes, that mechanism is present, but we have this audit process longer on top that can measure, okay, what were the resolutions were used, or if they stopped scanning for all of a reason, we can flag basically this in an audit ticket, and this means that the open source office and legal basically get a ticket to look at it, and if we say it's thumbs down, basically we will trigger this, and it will scan it. Like an audit report, and it will show up in their scan, and we will, in our case, we will notify their management to basically say like, hey, there's an audit finding that needs to be addressed. So I hope this kind of gives you kind of again, in a very condensed way, in the insight in how the workflows work. But the nice thing for us is like there's not one process workflow with Ort. We will publish several reference workflow, but you will see that the Bosch workflow is slightly different than the Here workflow, maybe slightly different than, say, the Facebook workflow, maybe slightly different than the Orange workflow. Every company has its own compliance process where they have the different things. And Ort is kind of, you can see it kind of as Lego blocks where you can build your own process that fits your needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just out of just to correct that, scan code user. So at Facebook we use the or Facebook uses the Opossum UI for that creation workflow that we started to discuss, and I don't think that the OSS review ticket is But I wanted to add to the previous discussion with the how to correct stuff, so that also the OSS review, that the Opossum UI can implement that creation workflow as an independent piece that can connect also to workflows that are not yet brought to Ort. Yeah. Are there other questions? Anything we can answer?
Something just came in from Powell. Have you considered advisor reporter hello? I'm not sure what that means. Have you considered presenting the advisor results in the web app report so that CVEs would be visible next to each dependency as an extra column?
Actually, I'm working on that right now. That will be soon actually landing in the web app. Actually, soon you will get advisor results also in the web app.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So maybe a general hint, if you're interested in the features we have on our radar and the features we are planning to implement, simply browse the public GitHub issues on the Ort project page, because we are trying to be very transparent about the issues and missing features we are aware of and plan to work on. So whenever you have questions, try to search the issue tracker first. And if you have more issues or feature proposals, feel free to file them, actually. Because one problem that I feel we have with Ort is that we have a rather large number of silent users. So there's a big number of users I haven't been aware of until they popped up on our Slack chat asking questions. And then I was asking like, hey, why didn't you come earlier to us? We could have solved this in a minute. And these people were sometimes struggling for weeks how to get things done. So please reach out to us early and often, either via Slack chat or issue tracker, because I feel that's, we are all in the same boat, and we're one open source compliance community. So we should just be aware of each other and talk to each other.
Sebastian Crane has a question. Will it be possible to use the Opossum UI to feed data back to Ort, as well as see Ort output?
We are planning to implement that. I think there's a clear path towards that. There are some issues in the mismatch in the data formats that are used, but it's for sure a goal to work towards that and to just export the decisions after they were made in a format that Ort can directly consume and use for the next iteration.
Yeah, so that's also the nice thing about Ort. So Ort is kind of like not just a tool by itself. There's a whole community of all kind of organizations working together as a whole. So again, we work with Philippe from XP. We work with Max from Opossum. We also talk to the VMware guys on Turn. Like, yeah, people might not be visible from the issue trackers and all the stuff, but like behind the scenes, there's a lot of contact points where everybody in the community that works on open source compliance tooling talks to each other on all the various issues that basically we encounter, and all try to work together to basically enable all different workflows for whatever problems each is trying to solve. So yeah, that's kind of the unique thing, but also the strength of the open source community, that we're really collaboratively trying to build basically the best review pipeline to solve our problems collectively. So yeah, as Sebastian already mentions, we have a Slack channel that you can join. You can ask us issues. We also, again, if you're a little farther along, we also have weekly Ort developer meetings, where basically we discuss things in more technical detail. So what we usually see is people first tingle and find an issue, then they find our Ort Slack, start asking questions, then they're getting ready to contribute, and then basically they join our weekly Ort developer chat, and that's where we really talk about in detail about all the stuff. But then there also there's parallel meetings, basically so I'm also participating in Spdx. Ort is also part of ACT, so automated compliance tooling. So again, it's really a network of basically all kinds of parties, all trying to tackle this crazy complex problem that is basically building a compliance process to deal basically with modern software development.
We have what might be the last question. It's a follow-up. Just Stephen asking if feeding information back to Ort isn't implemented yet, how does curation in Opossum work? You know, if Ort doesn't know about something for the future.
Via not yet disclosed puzzle pieces that are working orthogonal to Ort, that are via a workflow that implements a scanner that uses old information that we will describe, and that we are working on getting as much information as possible public. But the usual way would be that most companies or several companies already have some way of storing compliance information, like SW360 or other databases, or curations in Ort, and one would adopt the Opossum UI to feed into that. And we have our own solution for that that is not yet disclosed. So that's the bad answer.
Work in progress.
Yeah, work in progress.
Work in progress. All right. We're pretty much out of time here. If someone has a follow-up question, you can catch people on the tooling mailing list. You can catch them in Slack. You can ask on our main mailing list, and we will engage. Oh, we've got a final question or a comment from Ninoji-san. An idea for export control. Well, we should probably look at that. If we suppose we could have a flow that checks where the checksum of each file matches the file on GitHub, could this automate the verification of export control? So I guess it's confirmation of the file exists, it's this file, and that's yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I think this software heritage tool already provides the possibility to ask it for a hash, whether that's in the software heritage database. So that could be a first check if that file is something that is known publicly. And yeah, there's for sure a lot of possibility to implement something. But I just wanted to add to the previous question how to integrate the result of the Opossum UI. Opossum UI can also export CSV and bill of material like Spdx, just for completeness. That can also be fed back in the feedback loop. So, but Sebastian, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I wanted to add to the export control check topic. It depends a bit, of course, on what aspect of export control you're looking at. But if you would be looking at cryptographic algorithms and stuff like this, there is a less known feature in the ScanOSS snippet scanner that it can also recognize cryptographic code snippets and the strengths of cryptographic algorithms. And our plan is to leverage this feature from the ScanOSS snippet scanner to do some sort of export control checks regarding cryptographic algorithms.
Very cool. Philip has a question.
Yeah, Philip, please go ahead.
You're muted.
Yes, I was fighting with the mute control. Yes, Takashi-san, what I wanted to say is that I'm starting a new project to also provide something which would support that, which is, generally speaking, I have a fully open source code matching engine, which is both code and data. And there's no such thing out there for now. So that would be typically an application which is not specifically geared toward cryptography, but rather verifying that the code you have is effectively the code that exists upstream.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think we should probably jump in here and say that the OpenChain project is going to be working on supporting more information around export control and elsewhere. So way up there, pulling away from automation to the spec side, we'll be providing more guidance on that as well. All right, we are out of time. And what can I say, but thank you for an incredible audience. We hit 44 at our peak, which is great. Thank you so much, Thomas, Sebastian, and Max for this fantastic overview. We will be back in 2 weeks talking about the graphical user interface and turn for container compliance. Until then, be well, be safe, be healthy, and thank you all for being here.